Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, New St. Augustine.
At 10:15 a.m. New York time, Tuesday, the 4th of July of 1989, the U.S. Independence Day, I experimentally discovered how to massively parallel process and how to do so across an ensemble of 65,536 processors that were the building blocks of a new supercomputer. I proved that the slowest 65,536 processors, when used to solve the toughest problems in computational physics, is faster than the fastest supercomputer. That experimental discovery made the news headlines because it was a milestone in the history of the computer. I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing by first theoretically discovering it in the early 1980s and subsequently experimentally discovering it on the 4th of July of 1989 and experimentally discovering it when research supercomputer scientists rejected and mocked the technology of massively parallel processing as a huge waste of their time. For the 15 years onward of June 20, 1974, I worked alone to find a solution. I believed in massively parallel processing supercomputing, while sequential processing and vector processing supercomputer scientists dismissed the technology as utopia. I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing by first theoretically discovering how to synchronously communicate my extreme scale initial boundary value problems of physics and calculus and algebra. I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing by first theoretically discovering how to communicate my computational fluid dynamics codes and how to communicate those computer codes and how to communicate them via emails that I sent to and received from my 16-bit long email addresses. I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing by first theoretically discovering how to communicate those computer codes and how to communicate them across my new internet. That was my global network of 1 binary million commodity email wires. My new internet married my 64 binary thousand processors and married them together and married them as one seamless, cohesive supercomputer that had one processor at the crossroad of my 16 email pathways. Those 16 email pathways were mutually orthogonal to each other in the 16th dimensional hyperspace. That is, they were perpendicular in the 16 directions of an imaginary 16-dimensional universe. I discovered my new supercomputer by visualizing my email messages as firing like bullets out of my eyes and coming from computers in 16-dimensional hyperspace. I synchronously sent 65,536 or 2 raised to power 16 emails that were simultaneously received at 2 to power 16 email addresses that were each 16-bit long. I simultaneously received those emails at my 65,536 processors. I sent and received my 65,536 sets of answers, or the initial and boundary values of my extreme scale initial boundary value problem of computational physics and modern mathematics. I visualized each set of data as my email subject line. I visualized each email as containing 5 subject lines, but I visualized each email message as a 3 subject lined message. I received my emails at my 65,536 commodity processors, with each of my processor uniquely identified by a unique string of 16 zeros and ones. At the end of each computational cycle of my computational physics code that encoded the algebraic approximation of my initial boundary value problem of modern calculus, I visualized those emails as fired from the processors like bullets out of my eyes. On the 4th of July of 1989, the US Independence Day, I began each supercomputing cycle by firing 2 to power 16 emails across 16 times 2 to power 16 short bidirectional commodity email wires. That's a total of 1,048,576 email wires, each akin to a short telegraph wire. Those 16 directions that are mutually orthogonal in 16-dimensional hyperspace enabled me to synchronously compute the mathematical solutions to my world record algebraic equations and to compute them across my global network of 65,536 commodity off-the-shelf processors that are identical to each other and equal distances afar and apart from each other. That was how I experimentally discovered how to communicate the answers to my computational physics codes and how to communicate them via the 65,536 5-subject lined emails that I sent across a new internet that was my 16 network deep global network of 65,536 commodity off-the-shelf processors, and sent along its 1,048,576 internal bidirectional pathways that I visualized as tightly encircling the surface of a sphere in 16-dimensional hyperspace. I received each of those 5 subject line email message as a 3 subject line email message. The reason I dropped 2 subject lines was that my last 2 subject lines contained 2 unique strings of 16 zeros and ones. Those pairs of 16-bit long numbers only identified my sending and receiving email addresses that I no longer need. For that reason, I dropped them. I don't need the sending and receiving email addresses. I don't need them in the manner you no longer need the envelope that contained the sending and the receiving postal addresses of a letter that was delivered to you.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.